Before dawn, one of the most powerful military orders in medieval Europe was seized, almost as if a single command had flipped a switch. Knights who had guarded pilgrims, held fortresses, and moved wealth across kingdoms found themselves in chains. The popular story frames it as overnight, not a siege, not a last stand on a dusty frontier, a coordinated sweep that cracked the image of invulnerability and looked less like holy war than a raid on their own houses. If the Templars were built for holy war, why did their end look more like a police raid than a battlefield defeat? That question still hangs over their collapse. Was this justice catching up with a corrupt brotherhood? Was it royal debt politics dressed in legal robes? Papal pressure, internal weakness, a fading crusading purpose, or a tangled mix people still argue over without one neat verdict? In this Empire Secrets episode, we trace the Knights Templar from feared battlefield brotherhood to sudden institutional collapse. We will walk through the arrests that broke their command, the trials that dismantled their legitimacy, the suppression that turned a continental network into a name without an order. Along the way, recorded events stay separate from theory, legend, and speculation. Not every accusation becomes proven fact on this channel. Empire Secrets returns to power networks from Rome to the Knights, endings that still leave marks people debate. The Templars did not vanish in a fair fight. Their fall was paperwork, chains, and contested confessions. Stay with us as we open the case that ended an order once thought untouchable. To understand how the Templars fell, we first have to understand what they had become. The Knights Templar took shape as a military religious order tied to the crusading world. They lived under vows and discipline. Over time, they built a reputation for protecting pilgrimage routes, holding fortresses, and serving as a reliable shield where holy war and hard logistics met. In an age when faith and force often shared the same stage, that role was not decoration, it was the point. What made them unusual was the hybrid itself. A Templar was neither a simple monk withdrawn from the world, nor an ordinary knight answering only to a local lord. He was both, a man under religious rule and a fighter trained for campaign. That dual identity created something rare. Crowns, pilgrims, and church authorities could treat the Brotherhood as a trusted channel, organized, disciplined, and, at least in theory, answerable through a spiritual chain of command rather than every shifting secular ambition. Out of that trust grew reach. Across decades, the order gathered land, privileges, and practical responsibilities that looked, in hindsight, like a continental network. Houses and commanderies appeared far from the front. Arrangements for safekeeping, transfers of value, and special protections helped move people and resources across long distances. Careful accounts describe these roles as historical privileges and administrative practices rooted in the order's unique status, not as a modern bank dropped into the Middle Ages. Still, the effect mattered. Trust concentrated, property concentrated, influence concentrated. Here is the power paradox. Battlefield usefulness and administrative reach made the Templars valuable allies when crusading projects needed steady force and organization. The same traits later made them convenient targets, a wealthy, semi-autonomous brotherhood that did not sit neatly under ordinary royal control could look, in a moment of pressure, less like a partner and more like a prize or a problem. When crusading fortunes shifted and royal finances tightened, that exposure sharpened. An order built for holy war did not vanish the day the front lines changed. But its political usefulness could fade while its visible wealth and independence remained. That imbalance is one key to the downfall story ahead. Arrests, trials, and institutional collapse did not strike a powerless fringe group. They struck a network that had become hard to ignore. Later centuries would dress the Templars in myths of secret empires and hidden treasures. Those tales are cultural aftershocks. They are not the same thing as the administrative and legal record of suppression. The documented path runs through power, law, and timing, not through fantasy vaults. And that leaves a sharper question hanging over everything that follows. The same structure that made the order hard to ignore may also have made it easier to isolate when kings, popes needed a decisive strike. The hinge of the Templar downfall does not open on a battlefield. It opens on a coordinated arrest campaign tied to the French crown, an action so sudden in the popular telling it still feels less like war than a raid on an institution that believed itself protected. Leaders and brothers were seized, houses were secured. The public image of an untouchable military religious order cracked in plain sight. What made the moment so devastating was not only who was taken, but how the blow was meant to land. Simultaneity matters in this story. When arrests happen across a network at roughly the same time, communication frays. Local command cannot easily warn the next house. Resistance becomes scattered instead of organized. Even without inventing secret blueprints or exact troop lists, the logic is clear enough for documentary purposes. A brotherhood built on discipline and distance is strongest when its links hold. Break those links in one sweep, and the spine of the order bends before it can fully straighten. The shock value ran deeper than locked doors. For generations, the Templars had stood as a hybrid of monk and knight, useful in crusading theaters and familiar in European landscapes, holders of property, privilege, and reputation. That reputation was never proof against politics. Once senior figures and ordinary brothers were in custody, the aura of invulnerability thinned. An order that had seemed larger than any single kingdom suddenly looked answerable to chains, seals, and royal will. Yet collapse was not a perfect mirror in every realm. Pressure and proceedings were uneven. What began with dramatic force in one power center did not automatically play out the same way everywhere else. That unevenness is part of the historical puzzle. Some regions moved faster, some hesitated, some adapted the crisis to local law and local interest. The legend of a total overnight fall is a powerful narrative frame, but careful language matters. The order's autonomy and public standing could be fatally interrupted long before every brother, every house, and every jurisdiction told the same story. Into that atmosphere poured the accusation environment that still clouds the case. In trial materials and chronicles, charges of heresy, blasphemy, and secret rites appear. These should be heard first as allegations recorded in a coercive legal climate, not as automatically proven facts. Some confessions would later be treated by careful historians as contaminated by fear, pressure, or torture. Other readers of the same era have argued that authorities believed they were confronting real corruption. Between those poles sits the disputed middle, where substance and coercion are hard to separate cleanly, and where modern certainty would be dishonest. This is why the arrests remain the dramatic center of the downfall narrative. They turned a continental network into a legal emergency. They converted prestige into custody. They replaced the image of crusader guardians with the image of suspects. And they raised the question that keeps the chapter unfinished in the mind. Was the speed of the arrests proof of a long-prepared case, or proof that political timing mattered more than careful proof? Either answer, or some mixture of both, points forward to the machinery that followed. Once bodies were held and houses controlled, the story left the road and entered the chamber. Interrogations, retractions, royal initiative, and papal authority were about to collide. The sweep had broken the order's spine. The trial would decide whether anything could still stand. If the confessions were the engine of conviction, what happens to the story when some brothers took them back? Why did retraction not save the order? That question sits at the center of the Templar trials, where law, fear, and power collided in public view. After the arrests, the downfall did not move like a single clean verdict. It moved like machinery. Interrogations began. Charges circulated in a climate already thick with suspicion. Accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and secret rites appear in the surviving trial materials and later chronicles. Those accusations should be heard for what they are in a careful telling, recorded allegations from a coercive legal environment, not automatic proof of hidden ceremonies. Careful historians treat confessions extracted under fear, pressure, or torture as contaminated evidence. A statement made to stop pain or to survive another night in custody is not the same thing as freely offered truth. That distinction matters because the public drama of the trials depended heavily on words spoken under extreme stress. The process also had a theater quality. Royal initiative pushed hard and fast. Papal authority, in theory the higher spiritual court for a religious order, had to respond, negotiate, reassert control over a case already shaped by secular force. An order answerable, on paper, to the church was being dismantled through a tangle of crown pressure and ecclesiastical procedure. That legitimacy problem is part of why the story still feels unsettled. Who truly held the right to judge an international military religious brotherhood? And once arrests and seizures had already broken its command spine, how free was any later hearing to reverse the outcome? Confessions came, then, in some cases, retractions followed. Brothers who had admitted guilt later withdrew those admissions when the immediate threat eased, or when different authorities became involved. In an ordinary courtroom ideal, retraction should force a pause. Here, it did not restore the order. By the time words were taken back, property had been secured, networks disrupted, and the political usefulness of a decisive result had hardened. Retraction challenged the moral clarity of the case. It did not rebuild the institution. Leadership suffered in ways designed to be seen. Without inventing last speeches or courtroom dialogue, the broad outline is still stark. The order's highest figures became symbols. Public punishment and the destruction of prestige mattered as much as any single legal paragraph. When the head of a brotherhood is broken in the eyes of kings, clergy, and common witnesses, the brand of invulnerability dies with him. Prestige, once a shield, became a warning. Why push so far? The motives remain disputed interpretation, not a single settled fact. One theory emphasizes royal debt and the incentive to confiscate a wealthy, semi-autonomous network. Another points to genuine panic over corruption and reform inside the church's world. A further reading stresses geopolitics. After Crusade setbacks, an armed religious order looked less like an indispensable ally, more like an awkward concentration of power. Many researchers suggest a blend rather than a pure cause. Sincere belief, fiscal pressure, and political timing can travel together. What the trials reveal, then, is not a simple morality play. They reveal how confessions can drive a narrative while remaining unreliable as proof, how royal speed can outrun ecclesiastical caution, how an order built for holy war could be finished by procedure. The engine of conviction ran hot. Retraction cooled the certainty. It did not stop the machine. When an order dies on paper, why does its shadow grow larger in legend? And which parts of that shadow are history wearing a mask? That question hangs over the Templars once the trials had done their work, because the fall was not only a courtroom story, it was an institutional unmaking. In broad outline, what followed the arrests and proceedings was a sudden collapse of the order as a living command structure. Leadership networks were broken, houses were secured, property associated with the Templars was claimed, held, or reassigned under royal and ecclesiastical pressure. The brotherhood that had operated with unusual reach across kingdoms was suppressed as a legal body. On paper, the mission ended, the autonomy ended. The banner that once signaled a military religious identity no longer stood as a protected corporation of war and vow. But fall overnight, as the popular phrase frames it, does not mean every brother vanished in a single hour. That every realm moved in perfect lockstep. The practical meaning is sharper and stranger. The brand was fatally interrupted. The chain of command that made a scattered network act like one organism was cracked. The military religious purpose that justified privileges and loyalty could no longer be exercised in the open. Men might remain. Local arrangements might linger. Uneven outcomes across regions are part of the historical puzzle. Yet the order's public power, the thing that made it hard to ignore, was converted into custody, confiscation, and silence. Why did that conversion succeed? Careful answers stay modest because motives are argued and evidence is incomplete. One theory cluster points to fiscal pressure. A wealthy, semi-autonomous order presented a tempting target when royal finances tightened. Another theory emphasizes control. A disciplined armed network answerable in theory to the church could look to a crown like a state within a state. A third line of interpretation stresses lost crusading purpose. As the strategic usefulness of such orders shifted, political protection may have thinned. Some accounts also allow for sincere belief that corruption or forbidden practice had taken root, while others stress opportunistic rumor moving through a coercive climate. None of these clusters needs to stand alone. A blend is plausible. Precision about weight and sequence remains elusive. What the suppression does not automatically prove are the later legends that rushed in to fill the quiet. Tales of treasure spirited away on secret ships, of underground continuations wearing the old cross in hidden rooms, of cursed kings and supernatural revenge, belong, unless independently demonstrated, to cultural aftershock. They are speculation and storytelling layered onto a real institutional death. Hidden archives, coded survivals, and romantic escape narratives can be gripping, but they are not the same thing. The administrative fact of an order dismantled, separating those layers matters. Otherwise, myth borrows the authority of paperwork it never earned. And yet the name did not die cleanly. That is the paradox at the center of this chapter. Power became prison. Property changed hands. The legal body was closed. Still, the Templars remained useful as a symbol of sudden reverse, of sacred violence turned inward, of networks too large to trust and too famous to forget. This is how a power network leaves marks people still argue over, not through a tidy final scene, through seized houses, disputed confessions, reassigned wealth, and a long afterlife of unfinished questions. The order ended as an institution. The argument about why and what the ending meant did not. So we return to where this story began. Before dawn, in the popular telling, one of the most powerful military orders in medieval Europe was seized almost. If a single command had flipped a switch, knights shaped by the crusading world, bound by vows, trusted with roots, fortresses, and privileges that looked, over time, like a continental network, found that power could turn into prison with terrifying speed. The arc is clear in outline. A crusade-forged brotherhood became a force too useful to ignore, then met a legal and political assault of arrests, trials, and suppression that broke its spine as an institution. What remains unsettled is the why that still pulls people in. Was this justice pursued through extraordinary means, royal debt politics, and the lure of confiscation, papal pressure tangled with secular force, genuine fear of corruption inside a semi-autonomous order, the fading usefulness of a military religious machine after crusading setbacks? Careful history does not force a single culprit. The broad sequence of seizure, interrogation, confession, retraction, and formal ending sits on firmer ground than any one motive story. Layered causes and incomplete certainty are not a failure of the tale. They are the tale. That is the ethic we have tried to keep on screen. Fact where the outline is stable, theory where motives are argued and evidence is contested, legend where later storytelling grows a shadow larger than the paperwork. Confessions obtained under fear cannot be treated as simple proof. Treasure escapes, underground survivals, and cursed revenge motifs belong to the afterlife of a name, not automatically to the suppression itself. The record rewards modest claims more than certainty theater. Downfall stories hold attention for a reason. They compress glory, fear, seals on warrants, broken command, and rumor into one human-scale shock. We watch an order built for holy war end looking more like a coordinated raid than a battlefield defeat, and we feel the unfinished edge. The brand dies on paper. The questions do not. If the Templars' end was as political as it was judicial, what other medieval overnight falls are waiting to be read the same way? Chains over a red cross still make a powerful image because the collapse refuses a clean moral stamp on an entire age. Power networks leave marks through procedure and myth alike. If this Empire's Secrets investigation left you turning the same questions, stay with us for more Rome to Knight stories where endings still argue back. Tell us in the comments which explanation you find least convincing: debt, heresy panic, lost purpose, or a blend we cannot weigh precisely. Continue to the next episode in the playlist. The order fell, the debate did not.